Hi, everyone. Welcome to this year's Central Student Council debate, hosted by Room for Discussion. I'm Nena.
I'm Dirk.
And today we're going to be hearing from representatives from 4 of the parties that will be up for election next week.
The CSR, or the Centrale Studentenraad, is a council of 14 students that serve as the highest representative body at our university. During this election, you will be able to vote for who will be representing your interests as students for the upcoming academic year.
In today's debate, we'll begin with a quick introduction to each of the parties and then move to 3 rounds of questions on 3 different topics: de-internationalization and budget cuts, student well-being, and protests. After each one, you, the audience, will get the chance to ask questions. So please keep that in mind and try and keep them relevant or on theme.
For each round, we will ask an opening question I'm muted. It doesn't work both For each round, we will start with an opening question that we will ask to one party first, and then we will move from left to right to hear the other responses. After each round, we will ask more specific questions to which each party can raise their hand if they want to answer. If a party wants to respond to what has been said on stage, they can also raise their hand to answer. All candidates have agreed not to interrupt each other and to stay on time. If they go over time, we might need to cut them off. So, let's introduce our candidates. For de Activistenpartij, we have Francesco. For UvA Sociaal, we have Noor. For Inter, we have Vaishak. And for de Vrije Student, we have Pieter Joost. Please give them a warm welcome.
Okay, guys, thank you all for being here today. Right off the bat, we'd like to give everyone in the audience here a quick introduction to each of your parties, and who better to do that than yourselves. So please, in 1 minute, and 1 minute only, if you can try and keep it to that, could you explain what your party stands for, where we can all find your program, and what you think the main issue in this election is? When you have 15 seconds left, we will give you the signal, just so that you know. So starting off with the Activist Party.
Hi, so the Activist Party, or AP, stands for an ethical, accessible, and democratic university. We stand for an academic boycott of Israeli institutions because they are complicit in the current genocide and occupation of Palestinian land. We also want to cut ties with Shell and the fossil fuel industry. We want the UvA to invest in accessible infrastructure and to accommodate students with neurodivergence, disabilities, and different backgrounds, so basically listen to the student needs. And then we also want the UvA to listen more to the students in general, because we are the core of the community. We're not just numbers on a diploma factory, and we think that decisions are currently taken by people who are very remote from student life, and we should take more initiative, and we should be listened more. Thank you.
Thank you. UvA Sociaal?
Hi, UvA Sociaal is one of the oldest active student parties here at the UvA, and through the years we've stayed committed to our mission, which is that every student, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic background, deserves to feel equally represented at the university. And we've been committed to building a university that is inclusive and diverse and sustainable, while at the same time maintaining the standard of education. And these values are reflected in our 4 pillars, which are sustainability, accessibility, the quality of education, and diversity. You can also find the rest of our party program on our Instagram. Thank you.
Hello, we are Inter, the International Student Party. We are relatively new, and we stand to uphold and protect 5 core values, that being democracy and transparency, sustainability, diversity and inclusivity, quality of education, as well as mental health and student welfare. Ultimately, we stand to build a discourse-relevant environment in the university to ensure that student voices are heard and upheld throughout the entire year. We will always actively fight for student interests, and we prioritize having student active engagement to make sure that your voices have an impact and substance in the policies that are put forward. Today, we ask that you engage in the first opportunity to do so through the elections that will happen this week. Thank you.
My name is Pieter Joost. I'm representing the Vrije Student today. We have written a party program. You can find it on our website and on our Instagram in the bio. In that party program, we have the first two chapters, which I think are the most important: academic freedom and excellence in education. Some things we propose are less mandatory attendance, more connection to practice. The university should be a political, diverse curriculum, and also facilitate open debate at the university. What I think is the main point about this election is what do we stand for as student parties. DVS got founded in 2015 after the Maagdhuis occupation to show that there is a different way to foster change at the university. You don't have to occupy buildings, destroy the university property to let your voice be heard, and that's what we're standing for.
Thank you.
Thank you, and let's move to our first section immediately. So let's start with two highly relevant and largely interrelated topics: de-internationalisation and budget cuts. The Dutch cabinet has announced that they will cut 1.2 billion in higher education, putting pressure on universities like ours. Simultaneously, the proposed Balance Internationalization Bill, or Wet Internationalisering in Balans, aims to limit the number of English-taught programs. The University of Amsterdam has already decided to discontinue its English language psychology program starting from the 2027-28 academic year. In the light of these developments, the university expected to implement substantial changes.
So turning to the parties, keeping the cabinet's plans in mind, we would like to hear what your main concerns are regarding the budget cuts, and how your party plans to respond. So starting with UvA Social.
So at UvA Social, we believe that education, especially higher education at an international university, does not end in the lecture halls or in the classroom. It concerns the entire education environment, which includes student services, mental health support, and inclusive facilities. And these budget cuts jeopardize these facilities. With the government decision, we just ask the university to be more transparent when it comes to decisions that are brought about as a result of these budget cuts, and also to include more student input and staff input with these decisions as well. When it comes to internationalization, we support sustainable internationalization, which means we support international students coming to the university, but not when it comes at an expense of the quality of education affordability for both international and Dutch students. Thank you.
As the International Student Party, we recognize that we live and study in an environment that is highly international and diverse. As I mentioned before, two of our core values are quality of education as well as diversity and inclusivity. Currently, we are happy that the UvA has condemned the budget cuts and stands to fight with us to allow more international students and to continue the platform we have for international students in this academic environment, and we stand with that. Along with that, we do very agree with UvA Social that there needs to be transparency in the way that these budget cuts take place, in the sense that we need to know where the money will be going, what is going to be taken away from us, in a manner that continues to support students in the way that they're needed to. Thank you.
Of course, it's not good news for the university that we have to cut in millions or millions of dollars, and also cut down on international students. I do believe, though, that we have to look at the concerns of the government and where they are coming from. We are getting a lot of international students to this university, and after that they leave within a few years. I think the university should focus on trying to keep these people, these international students here for the Netherlands. If we educate them, that they also have a job opportunity here. So I think that that's a very important focus for the university also to challenge the budget cuts and have a good story to our government to why should we keep these international students and why should we deserve the money that we are having.
Yeah, so as we know, the budget cuts are very problematic and they will affect a lot of students, a lot of teachers as well. I think that what the UvA is doing is really not the way to go about it, in the sense that they are trying to challenge the government by making a counter deal, which was not talked with anybody. They didn't talk with students, they didn't talk with teachers. It was just like dropped upon everybody. It causes a lot of stress. And the university is not really trying to fight, let's say, the right-wing government, which clearly has no interest in higher education. They want to put less money for it. They want to increase expenses, for example, of defense, etc. And this is a very dangerous trend. And we, as university students, should really stand up and say that this is not the future that we want. AP, Activisten Partij, shows up for protests. We were there for every budget cut protest. We are in favor also, for example, of including Dutch courses for every student, so we can also, in face of these challenges, help people to be in a future where they will need to know Dutch, because if you don't know Dutch now, you have to spend hundreds or thousands of euros on your own to learn it, and we think that the university should give that for free, and that's something that the university doesn't do, and we really think that's problematic. And also regarding the psychology track, now there's going like a petition, there's going to be protests for that, and Activisten Partij and Roeterseiland in the CSR are the only two parties that have signed this petition, and I think that shows there is solidarity between some parties and the students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then getting more specific, these budget cuts are coming, and we were wondering how will your parties respond? Any of you can answer this by raising their hand, but what needs to be prioritized? What needs to be saved at all costs? I saw Inter first.
I'm very glad this question was asked because while I do agree with my colleague here with the sentiments behind the laws coming into place, it is important that the university maintains a priority of setting us as students up the best that we can be to change the world in the future. The priority should not be solely integration. While it should be something we encourage, it is about the fact that we get the best education we can with the highest quality that we have in a way that sets us up to change the world as we move forward. If the priority is not the case, it does not respect the student interest in the way that we need it to. Thank you.
So the Vrije student as well?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think education shouldn't face the budget cuts. We really should focus on education with the money we still have and just really focus on that. And I see if with Inter here we have somebody who's also feeling that way.
Sociaal, Activistenpartij?
Yeah. So again, Activisten Partij is of course very much against these budget cuts, as we've shown it, showing up on the streets, because we're not just a party that comes up during election time, but we're there all around to support the students. We're there all around to build a community and to also create integration between Dutch students and international students. We think that the way that these budget cuts will affect students is also disproportionate, because as always, not every student is the same, not every student has the same opportunities. So for example, some students can afford to go somewhere else to study, not everybody can do that. So I think it's really important that the UvA takes accountability and takes care of its international students that are currently here and make sure that they have the best protection against the cutting of courses, the cutting of resources for them.
And then the CSR will have to advise on decisions regarding de-internationalisation as well, and reporting programs back to being taught in Dutch. We were wondering how your party specifically to that de-internationalisation is planning to respond. Again, raise of hands and we will give you the floor. Activistenpartij.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what you are referring to, but in terms of advice from the CSR. But something that has happened now, which is, again, really problematic, is the UvA with the UNL, the University of the Netherlands Association, decided to eliminate this bachelor as trying a bachelor of psychology as trying to negotiate with the government. But this was done without even asking anybody in the university, no students, nobody in the medezeggenschap. And this is problematic also because we as medezeggenschap have consent rights on changing programs. So they basically took the decision for us, and then we will have to approve it because we will have the pressure of it from also the government. So that's why we think that the way to go about budget cuts should also be more bottom-up instead of top-down, in the sense that we should also try to see where we can um, where we can make change and where it's, let's say, what are the best ways to counteract this very dangerous proposal? And this is not by ignoring the students.
I saw that the vice student wanted to respond to that.
I'm missing a bit of realism here because it's not only the right-wing government that started this. Last government also started the de-internationalisation position. So it's clear that the government in the Netherlands is gonna be going through with these plans. So as a university, we have to be ready for that, and it's not really a choice that I think we as a student council even can make.
And having Inter in the name, I suppose you also want to say something about this?
Yes, I think we align a lot more with the activist party here because it is highly important that students do have the voice. While it is not something that we can directly affect as it is ultimately a government decision, it is something that the university should consider, being such a significant population of international students, in which way the de-internationalization takes place. A big consideration is holding student forums and proper discussions, which have not taken place in the past. Inter is attempting to do this through our Introduction to Student Politics events, the forums that we host, and Inter News, a newsletter that we hold, in order to educate students about what is going on so that they may contribute to the policy decision that is going to be made.
Thank you. So I'm hearing a lot of consensus regarding ensuring quality of education. But to round off this section on the budget cuts, we want to hear, looking ahead to next year, what are the concrete ways that each of your parties thinks is the way to go about ensuring that your student bases, particularly the international ones, feel supported throughout this process?
Inter?
I can start this off by saying I think it has been a weak job in the way international students have been considered over the past year and over the past 2 years in regards to these budget cuts. The most important thing, as all of us have echoed, is that the student voices need to be put first. So while it is a logistical decision to be taken by the university, students in a high education environment, academic environment, we have the knowledge, the information, and the capabilities to contribute to that decision making. Moving forward, it is important that policy making starts at the student basis before coming to the executive board and the Central Student Council so that we account for everyone's voices, not just the ones that are at the top.
Yes, the activist party.
Yeah, I think we should also get to the underlying concerns as why the internationalization is happening. And the reason for this is that students come to the Netherlands, they learn their degree, they get their diploma, and then they leave. And this is also because the universities are just becoming essentially diploma factories. People come, they spend their money on their degree, the university gets a lot of money for their degrees, and then there's no incentive in staying. We believe that integration should be the way to go. So like creating a community, a university-wide community that is not just international and Dutch people separate, but for example, having Dutch courses accessible to everybody, making sure that everybody has equal access to the labor market. AP also really tries to help stay in support of students who also have a job, because in this expensive country and expensive cities, a lot of students have to take also a job on the side of their studies. So we believe that solidarity, integration, and also creating a community and not just a diploma factory is the way to solve these underlying issues that are clearly there in the Dutch society.
Any final remarks from UvA Sociaal or de Vrije Student?
Yeah, we agree as well. I mean, the quality of education is one of our 4 pillars as well. But so is diversity. We've always had a very diverse board at UvA Sociaal and very diverse student council members. And I think that is the most important thing, having that representation in the councils, in the Central Student Council, especially from not just EU, but also non-EU students when these decisions are affecting these students as well. I think that's very important just to have that representation. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, I also believe we should really focus on the integration of international students in the Dutch labor market first, with learning the language. That's also what we propose: free Dutch lessons for international students. So I agree with I agree with you guys on that one. But we still have to look how are we gonna face these budget cuts. And I only heard from the other parties only ways how to spend money, but how are we gonna reduce the costs of education? Because what I hear right now is only we want this, we want this, we want this, but there have to be made some choices.
And with that, we will look to the audience for the first time. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we will come to you with a microphone. Yes, here at the front.
I hear you guys talk a lot about encouraging integration, and I hear the classes, and I understand your point. But besides these classes and besides this encouragement to the labor market, how do you actually propose to create this integration? Do you guys have a game plan of how you would like that to happen?
Inter.
Thank you for the question. I think the biggest point, which we've echoed quite a few times, is that there needs to be a platform to do so. So far, what we failed is having spaces and opportunities for, let's say, specifically Dutch students and international students to integrate together, to discuss together, to hold discourse regarding the academic environment. If we set up these platforms, we are taking the first step to move forward in that integration. Now, of course, there are concerns about spending money. However, all integration does not have to happen through the spending of the budget. Making classes more accessible through external partners is not something that has to come out of the UvA's budget itself. We just have to establish the connections. These connections take place through the foundational platforms, which we are just lacking in today. Thank you.
To this question, Activistenpartij?
Yes, I like the question. Well, in some sense, Activistenpartij already does something in the sense that we are a large group of Dutch and international students that come together. We do community building as well, we do events, etc. But institutionally, I think there definitely needs to be more community-driven effort and investments. For example, right now, I tie on the piece of grass over there. There's a protest because the university is cutting down the budget of the USC, so the University Sports Center. And also, CREA is going to get budget reduced. And we think this is problematic because, again, we always keep talking about quality of education here, quality of education there. But education is not just the classes, it's not the tutorials and the lectures. Education is also coming to the campus, having good facilities, being able, for example, to afford a good meal and staying on the campus, going and have sports, going for a cafe. These things here create a better integration, a better community than just having good classes will ever do.
UvA Sociaal, on this specific question, a specific strategy regarding integration?
Yeah, at UvA Sociaal, we've always pushed also for more affordable and accessible Dutch language courses. And this is something we worked on this year as well, and we've been doing for the past few years. And I think sometimes it does just come down to the language as well when it comes to integration, especially with international students joining the job market right after their bachelor's or master's after spending a couple of years here. I think they should be better prepared with these Dutch language courses.
And then lastly, de Vrij Student.
I think the Dutch language course is the first big step towards that. Also, I think study associations and student political parties can play a big role in the integration of Dutch and international students. Yeah, especially student associations, I think, is where you are getting to know people from your program, and that's a way where we really need to start integrating Dutch and international students more.
Thank you. And then we move to our second round of questions. We'll now focus on accessibility and student well-being. So, turning to the parties, student health and well-being is one of the CSR biggest concern, being student representatives by students for the students. For your party, what are the biggest hurdles to student well-being right now, and what's your party's approach to addressing this? In this round, we will start with Inter.
Of course, I think Uva Social mentioned this a bit earlier, especially considering the budget cuts. One thing we cannot let happen is mental health and student health resources being threatened due to the idea of money becoming an obstacle. What we see the biggest problem is that the resources available are not communicated well enough, and those resources are not strong in the sense that every student can access them. One of the things that Inter is highly campaigning on this year is to improve the platforms of accessibility to student health and mental welfare resources through initiatives such as external partners with qualified professionals, as well as student professionals who are involved in the community already. Thank you.
Vrije student.
We think the university should focus its money on academics, and because we are an academic institution and we should focus on the best education, giving the best education as possible. So I think that's the most important part where the university should spend their money, especially in facing budget cuts. We are all here together to learn something, and that shouldn't die under the budget cuts. So that's for us the main focus.
Specifically, what do you think are the biggest hurdles that students are facing right now?
The biggest hurdles
biggest hurdles to accessibility and well-being for our students.
The biggest hurdles for accessibility and well-being. Okay, I think the biggest hurdles are, that's also what we propose in our study program, is the information that is scattered around on all kind of websites. We propose a centralized platform so you can find it all easy in one place. I think that's one of because the university does propose a lot of things for well-being and for accessibility that maybe students don't know about.
To the Activistenpartij, moving left to right.
Yeah, I disagree with the Vrije Student in the sense that, again, education is not just your classes, and especially because if you just get that mindset that we should just invest money or better classes, better resources for classes, etc., we forget the fact that studying is already a privilege and not everybody has the same access to it. So, for example, the UvA has really, really terrible ways of working with students with neurodivergence, students with disability, physical impairments, etc., because they essentially are a cost for university, and this cost is not something that the UvA is so willing to accommodate. What we think that the students are facing, for example, in terms of like stress or burnout, can be helped with accommodating measures. So listening to the students, what do they need to do better in exams, and giving that to them. Then also institutionally, there's obstacles to good learning. For example, the BSA is essentially just a stress measure of students to make them stress to pass, and it's also proven not to work. In humanities, where the CSR has a majority, we are working to abolish that because data prove that it's not effective. And also, mandatory attendance has been abolished in humanities.
Right. We will ask about the BSA later in this section, but coming back to neurodivergent students, what are the hurdles that they are facing that you're talking about?
So I know from personal experience and talking from to a lot of people who had the same, similar experiences. For example, if you have ADHD and you need a quiet room, that often is not possible because the UvA cannot have enough room for everybody. Often you need to show your diagnosis multiple times, and often the UvA only recognizes certain types of diagnosis, which also take time and money to get. Other universities, for example, in Maastricht, they're much more accommodating towards these measures. They actually talk to the students, they ask what their needs are, and they try to accommodate them as much as possible. The UvA has a lot of bureaucracy, but not enough listening.
And then lastly, let's move to UvA Social. This same question, biggest hurdles and how you're trying to tackle them?
We think the biggest hurdles when it comes to student well-being is that student support services are often not inclusive or diverse. They don't take into account a number of students with disabilities or neurodivergent needs. And yeah, when it comes to student psychologists or study advisors, is not often taken into account. And I think one way to tackle this would be to increase the feedback from students. I think that is not something that is regularly done, especially for specific group of students who need to, who have special needs. They need to increase communication, I think, with these groups so that they know better what they need and what they require from the university. And I do agree, education is important. It's the standard should not be compromised, but neither should be the student well-being at the university.
So coming back to what you already mentioned with the BSA, it's another big concern regarding accessibility. So we're interested to hear, do you think it should remain? And if not, what are reasonable alternatives? Starting with the activist party.
As I mentioned before, the BSA is mainly an obstacle and not really aiding for student success. Because so in humanities, again, Activist Party has majority, and we've talking about BSA, and we are in the process of abolishing it. Because the data shows that it's not really effective. Like, most students get their BSA and they just drop out. And then we don't know if they just drop out, and then we don't know if, for example, do they enroll in the courses again next year, or maybe do they get a negative BSA and go to the FU? Because the thing is, the BSA doesn't really give the students an opportunity to reflect on what they're doing. It just gives them some stress to grapple with and to essentially manage what they're also studying for the first time. What we think would be a better idea is an advising studying advice. So you talk with your study advisor, you see how are you going, what things are you doing well, what things are you not doing well, is this the right course for you, should you take less courses, should you take more time? These are things that should be taken into account, because again, the BSA just pushed them on students on their first year of studying, especially if you study in a big city or in like a new language that you haven't done before. This is a lot of pressure on students, and this can just cause burnout and unwell-being.
Do you have a response to that?
Yeah, sure. I think a part of this that we're forgetting here is that the root of the issue is not just the BSA. It is important to consider that while, yes, the BSA can be a stressful factor, it is something that simply needs reform, not necessarily abolishment. In this sense, Inter maintains a somewhat neutral stance, considering that before the BSA comes to play, there are considerations of how recent opportunities are given, how students can receive feedback and then ask for a change in the grade based on their own perception of the assignment that they turned in, and how that ultimately contributes to the BSA. Because if we do have an advising study advice, sure, we've changed the underlying concept of the BSA, but it doesn't tackle the underlying problems of students not having the proper voice in the academics that they're engaged in.
Can I flip this around, though? Because obviously with the BSA, we're talking specifically about the impact on the students. But taking into mind the sort of institutionally, how it helps sort of filter out and keep the student base at a maybe reasonable or like acceptable level that the university can deal with. If we're talking about something like a advising BSA, what are the challenges that come along with removing the sort of institutionality of the BSA? How do we deal with that? Yeah,
So,
go ahead.
Replying to that, because I've been in the BSA work group, for example, in humanities, the data just really shows that it's not working, because most students get it, and they, like, really not as many students get to the point where like they get to the BSA, or like, I think it was like 1 or 2%, like getting their BSA and then just like using it to improve. Like, this is just, if you just need to pass a certain amount of courses and you see that you're not gonna pass them, you can simply unenroll from the university and try it again like next year. Like this, the BSA, I don't think is a well formalized way of keeping control of the number of students, because that should be done priorly. Like I don't think it makes sense to get students into here and then be like, okay, only some of you are good enough to study after the first year. Like, doesn't really make sense to me. Everybody should have the same opportunities, and maybe, especially because the first year is the biggest struggle, because everything is new. And if you maybe are like a first generation student, or if you come from, if you also have to study alongside, if you also have to work alongside your studies, you may not have the same resources or just focus on studying full-time as everybody else does. So essentially, the BSA just shows that some students have the privilege of committing to full-time studying, and some students just struggle with it, and they should not be punished for it.
Is there a response?
Yes, I think we can expect something from the students here. I think we should really watch out with lowering the bar of our degrees and also making it less valuable. Of course, everybody has a reason why they might not get their BSA, and that's why you also have exemptions for it. I think university has a lot of rules in place for that. A lot of things you can do if you don't pass your BSA to still continue with your study. So I think we should really watch out with getting rid of barriers and making it making it even the value of the diploma even less.
Enter, please.
Yeah, I feel like the biggest concern here is the wrongful filtering of students. However, abolishing the BSA or necessarily debating about the BSA in this moment, once again, doesn't tackle the root of the problem. Because when we have individuals who study differently because of different conditions, different concerns, the university's first task should be to establish a policy that accommodates for that, as well as accommodating for accessible and valuable substantive research opportunities, feedback on student assignments, so that ultimately the BSA can be a valid measure of where you are academically. Because it doesn't, just by changing it to an advising study advice, it doesn't account for the fact that students will still systematically suffer from the lack of voice and input that they have. So before we move on to fix the BSA per se, we have to start with the individual bottom-up problems.
We'd love to hear from UvA Social, if you have...
Yeah, just the general stance in regarding the BSA. We understand that the BSA is a government-mandated policy, but the standard that it's set at and how strictly it's imposed is up to the university. So we do believe that the BSA should be a little bit more flexible and maybe also case-sensitive, because we've seen that getting the BSA disproportionately affects students with personal or financial strains. And a way to tackle this maybe would be to improve the study advice that students receive from the student support, because often we've seen that there's a difference in advice that each student receives, and that just seems a bit unfair, especially when it's regarding research or just exam policies. So that's definitely an area that the university could improve in.
So rounding off, one last topic that we'd like to talk about in the issue of accessibility is obviously regarding physical accessibility of the university on campuses. What do you think still needs to be done, or where does the university fall short? Very quickly. Yes, UvA Social.
So through my work in the FSR, I found out that our university consistently ranks low when it comes to students with visual impairments, and this is just nationally. It's quite embarrassing, actually. So I think this is definitely something that the UvA should not overlook: students with physical disabilities and visual impairments, not just physically on campus, but also in terms of education and digital systems, especially when sometimes lectures or tutorials are hybrid. It does not take into account students with visual impairments. That's definitely an area the university is lacking in.
Yes, activist party, keep it short, please.
Yes, I think it's really funny, for example, that there's only like guidelines in one of the campuses of the UvA, and they lead to a revolving door. And just this shows how little the commitment of the UvA is to actual measures, because they love to like boast about how UvA is inclusive, how it's diverse, etc. But that just feels performative when you don't have actual investment in concrete facilities and in concrete infrastructure for example, people with physical disabilities.
Sure. Enter?
Yeah, of course. I think UvA Social has put it excellently well regarding visual impairment. Another aspect is for those that are hard of hearing. This definitely has to do a lot more with student accessibility to education in the first place through lecture recordings, which is a very inconsistent policy across the UvA. This puts people at different standards and also makes people incapable of being at the same level in their academic environments. And that is one thing that the UvA really has to focus on as we move forward.
Yeah, we agree with that. The university should be accessible for everyone, from hearing aids or physical. Somebody in a wheelchair should be able to come to university. Also, I find that a really good point. Also, people that maybe have to work one day and have the lectures, it should be online, the lectures for people. So it's accessible for everyone also if you can make it one day.
Thank you. Turning to the audience again for a second round of questions related to the topics of student well-being and accessibility. If you have a question, please raise your hand. I saw one in the back.
BSA, not student well-being. It's regarding BSA, not student well-being.
That's okay.
So my understanding of the BSA is that it's there to filter out students after the first year. And the reason it exists so strongly within Dutch education systems is because the entry requirement is quite low while trying to come in. It's hard to abolish such a strong system because it exists within all universities of the Netherlands. So maybe it's good to look into the root causes of why meeting the BSA is becoming so hard for so many students across so many studies. Maybe the causes of that is because we only get 8 weeks to study a certain course, which isn't enough time to truly grasp all the concepts. Another reason is because the lack of breaks during exam periods. Are these considerations your parties has taken into consideration because they could be more feasible to implement rather than abolishing the whole BSA system as a whole?
Starting with the activist party.
Yeah, I wanted to reply that because of recent, well, last year, changes in the way the BSA works, now the university has institutional autonomy on setting it more than before. And that's, for example, why we have a chance in humanities to actually abolish it, and now it's been talked to at the central level. I really hear your point, and I also think it's the way with like a lot of students, really struggle with the BSA, and the data also shows that, for example, in humanities, 98% of the students who then asked for a waiver on the BSA were granted it. So then it's just an extra step because then they have to go to the student advisor, they have to wait for it. They just have a lot of pressure on them, and then everybody just gets waived it. So it just feels like an obstacle that really has no point in being there, because he has to filter out like students who might be struggling with different things. Because like if you're into university, you probably can do it yourself. Like you probably are able to study. And I also didn't really like the point on that the president had before, that it would damage the quality of education, because you still need all of your credits to pass anyway. So the BSA is not there to improve the quality of education. It's just there as a...
I think the question was more about these sort of structural implications of the way that education is set up in the first place, right? She mentioned how short our blocks are and how that could impact the BSA in itself. So if we could hear your thoughts on that.
So as I said before, the activist party agrees on this, because the university is just getting into this kind of like diploma factor. You just have to study your 6 weeks, you do your exam, you study your 6 weeks, for 3 years until you get your diploma. There is not enough space for students to have more, like to take their time to studying. We also think that, for example, eliminating mandatory attendance is something that can help students be more flexible. For example, if they're also working on the side, we think that they should have more opportunities for taking their time in their studies. And this is something that really needs to be like allowed. And currently, the UFA is trying to push back on it, also because they would lose essentially money. And we don't like the idea that everything is about money and passing courses.
Thank you. Can we have 2 quick comments from Inter and then UvA Sociaal before we keep going?
Yeah. I really appreciate your question, because I think you hit it well in saying that It is about the struggles to reach that BSA. And that is exactly where Inter stands in moving forward, that we must focus on better connecting students to the tutors who are grading their assignments, to the tutors who are taking attendance and not being graceful about it, to the exam coordinators and the exam board who are not being graceful about reset opportunities and how to move forward with it. Because ultimately, when you're attacking the institution of the BSA and mandatory attendance and the core structure, you're simply putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound without actually fixing what's going on internally. If we attack the systematic struggles, that is how we make the change to better the academic environment for students in a way that it supports them academically.
Thank you. Uffe Social?
At UvA Social, we've also proposed more education-free days, especially after end terms. I think that's something the university should definitely look into, because right after end term, students go right into the next block, and I think that's quite a lot of stress, especially in the first year when you're dealing with the BSA. But I also think just improving student services so students have more office hours, more access to support outside of the classroom is definitely something that could help them through their academic journey.
Thank you. We'll now be moving on to our final round of questions related to protests. So in the past year, our campus has really seen a surge in student activism, particularly concerning the university's ties with Israeli institutions. And as a response, quite recently, the UFA updated its house rules, now requiring, for example, students, individuals, to have to be able to identify themselves during protests within university buildings.
And the right to protest is a cornerstone of our democracy, and our campus in the last year or so has served as a prominent example of this, where it has been put to the test. I have just shortly introduced the new house rules, or we have. For your party, are these new house rules reasonable? And this time we start with de Vrij Student.
I think these new house rules are reasonable. As we see, of course, what you said, it's a cornerstone of democracy, the freedom to protest. But what happened here last year, the vandalism, again, the occupations, it costs the university millions, and I think it's good that there are now rules in place to keep it going smoother. So.
Thank you. The Activist Party?
We believe that these houses are unreasonable, and it's not just the Activist Party. In the CSR, we had legal advice from human rights lawyer, which pointed out that a lot of these points in the new house rule contrast with Dutch and international law on human rights and on the right to demonstrate. We think it's really important that the UFA allows students to let their voices heard, to speak up and to facilitate demonstrations rather than calling the police on them. We don't think that the university should call the riot police on its own students. So beyond legal doubts, also this shows that the university would rather oppress demonstrations rather than listening and engaging with the students.
Specifically the house rules, what's your opinion on them?
Yeah, as I said, well, it's not just my opinion. Like in the CSR, we got legal advice that says a lot of their points are constitutional. For example, the ban on occupation just being like a blanket ban, whereas there have been cases in which occupations are it's a legitimate form of protest. And we also have to remember that, for example, what we are running for, the CSR, medezeggenschap, came as a result of student occupation. So especially at this university, especially in this country, student demonstrations have been the core of societal change, and it's important that the university does not ban them.
Medezeggenschap, co-decision making. And then to UvA Social.
The house rules, we think, are a little bit vague when it comes to a lot of topics, and as activists said, they just put a ban on a bunch of things without really going into them. And we also heard that they were also rejected by the Works Council, which is definitely something that we should look into and why this was done as well.
Inter?
Yeah, regarding the House rules, I think it sets a dangerous precedent because when you start setting restrictions and rules on the right to demonstration and protest, you are starting to set a precedent that restricts your freedom of speech and the opinions and values that you have. In an institution like the UvA, that is, as the Activist Party has said, the core of social change. But moving forward, what the UvA has to do is not to start with a policy of reaction, but rather with a policy of coordination, cooperation, and protection. Students and their values and opinions should come ultimately first, and then we look towards mutual respect that actually leads to a consensus and some sort of substance in the policies that we produce. So far, what we have seen is only a simple clash, and that has led us not enough to the point that we need to get to. And if we protect this academic environment, that's how we preserve these values as well as the education that we're all receiving.
It was an introduction question, but I saw that the Vrije Student wanted to respond. This is your time.
Yeah, I do not think it's the house rules go against Dutch or national law. Of course, everyone can ask a lawyer to find spots, but I think it doesn't go into Dutch or international law as well. And I just find it a bit disturbing that none of these parties here say anything about the vandalizing that happened here. Millions of dollars or euros in damages, and nobody is talking about it. Everybody here saying, "Oh no, we need to save the protest." Again, the occupation of the Magenhaus, 150,000 euros, and yeah, I think it's just crazy that we are all sitting here with parties that don't say anything about that.
Specifically then on those damages that the Vrije Student mentioned. The Activistenpartij, I saw that you raised your hand.
Yeah, so the millions of dollars that the university has to spend on covering those could have been well avoided if they actually engaged with the students and didn't just send riot police on them, which led to an escalation of the demonstration, which then led to another occupation. Like, we have to see things in context. We can't really say, oh, some students are damaging the university. Like, some students are speaking up and are being repressed because they're speaking up about the ties that this university has with institutions that actively engage with genocide, with occupation, and with apartheid in Palestine. And this is really problematic, and the university, even when their own ethical committee tells them that the Hebrew University is complicit in human rights violation, the day after they get to Folia and they talk about how they love the institution and they want to open up a new collaboration. So even when there's something else that's not the students that tell them, maybe you should stop, they still put their ego forward and they disregard human rights.
Well, I would love to facilitate the debate between the two of you. We have other parties as well. I would like to hear from UvA Sociaal on this particular issue.
I think talking about vandalism while avoiding the context is a little bit biased, I think. Last year, what happened with the riot police, I feel like I didn't feel unsafe around any protesters, but I felt unsafe on this campus when I did see the police. So I feel like, especially as you mentioned, Folia as well, they have taken a lot of things out of context and referred to student safety, but not student safety when it came to all the riot police and the difference in the ratio between the protesters and the police that the university called on their own students.
So, staying in this vein, earlier this year, the UvA released a statement revising one of its ties with the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. So, for your parties, should the university cut all ties with Israeli institutions? Starting with the Vrije Student.
Yeah, I first want to react to everything that's being said, just said. The police didn't vandalize our buildings. The students did. The police didn't throw rocks at the police.
The question
Yeah,
was
but let me have a chance to react, because there are your three parties saying that it's okay to throw rocks at the police, that it's okay to vandalize the building. No, the university didn't call on the police on students that didn't do anything. If you see here, we have all day we have silent sit-ins for the Palestine cause. Nothing happens. The students got violent, and we have here sitting parties that organize these kinds of things, millions in damages, and they don't take any responsibility.
Point taken. Hebrew University ties. That was what the question was about.
We follow the ethics commission in what they say about ties. So we do want to stress that it's very important to look critically at ties, and also because it's very important to support also critical voices in nations that have a questionable regime, or that have a questionable regime. So we should really look careful in canceling ties with it. But if the ethical commission says it is complicit in human rights valuations, then we should cut ties with them.
Thank you. The Activist Party?
The Activist Party has a very clear line on academic boycott. We stand for an academic boycott of Israeli universities because they are systematically, and not individually, but systematically complicit in the ongoing genocide, because they have so many ties with the military and the defense industry. They also have sometimes campuses on occupied Palestinian land, which is international crime. And they also promote apartheid through programs. And we think it's really problematic that our university essentially gives a stamp of approval on these institutions because we collaborate with them university-wide. So, for example, in the case of Hebrew University, the committee is really clear about it. This university is potentially systematically complicit in gross and systemic human rights violation in the region, and they also limit academic freedom. So there's nothing, what you said about critical voices in central countries, it's the critical voices in Israel and Palestine telling us to do academic boycott. The boycotts are led by these people, and I think it's really important to understand what the nature of the boycott is. It's not a ban on collaborating with individual researchers. It's a ban on collaborating with these institutions that have to change because of societal pressure.
Thank you. Do we have any comments from Inter or UvA Social?
At UvA Social, we believe in cutting all ties with Israeli institutions that are complicit in genocide. And we do know that there is now an ethical committee that overlooks these ties, but this committee has not been active for the past few years, and only now have they taken this stance. So we do ask them to be a little bit more transparent, also overlook all the other collaborations in the past and in the present that have been brought up, and just more transparency with them, but also we ask them to be a little bit more active because it's a very recent thing. We've always had an independent ethical committee, but they've not been active until now.
A quick comment from Inter?
Yes, of course. I think Inter recognizes the legitimacy of the Ethical Commission. We see that as an independent organization that advises the university. It does make decisions that are valid. However, what is not happening is that the UvA is not taking an active stance in proceeding with it. Because while cutting ties is important, it must also be shaped by the voices of the students in which institutions, as well as companies, that we cut ties with. That is not happening. Once that starts happening is when we have a platform where the ties that are being cut, the academics that are being enjoyed by our student population, is truly from the students and by the students only.
Thank you. And with that, we turn to the audience for one last round of questions. If you have one, please raise your hand and we will come to you with a microphone. I see a person in the back with a hat.
Yeah, I have a question specifically to the Activistenpartij. I actually agree with a lot that you say, and I think you have very good points. So much for open academic debate. And that brings me to my last concern with your party, is that you have endorsed, or at least been vocally in support of certain protests that have disrupted open academic debate. And I'm really wondering how the Activistenpartij sees this going forward and how they will keep fostering this open and academic debate. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Well, I think that Yeah, we always hear about, yeah, we need to have open academic debate, etc., etc. But nobody's actually talking, from the administration, nobody's actually talking to the students who are demonstrating, because that's inconvenient to them, and it's much easier to just call Femke Halsema, call the riot police, and have them escorted out. So academic debate takes different forms. Academic freedom also takes different forms, and one form of them is academic responsibility. We do not want our own institution, which we are part of. We are part of our university. And I, personally, my party does not want to be complicit in human rights violations. That's also part of academic freedom. We don't want to be tied with institutions that deny academic freedom and that deny open debate. So this is what my party stands for.
Was there a response from the president?
Yes, I think it's a very good question, especially if you saw what happened here last time. There was the Minister of Defense was here, and the Activist Party disrupted this interview, and you guys all couldn't ask questions. They could have been very critical questions about Israel, questions where you're standing for, but that didn't happen. And also I want to react that the university doesn't go into talks with the protesters. It's just simply not true. Peter Paul, even last year he talked about it on TV. He went into talks with masked people and got flamed for it on national TV. So it's just not true that the university doesn't try to talk with their protests or talk with the students.
We'd really like to hear some more audience questions. So if I see another one in the back.
Oh yeah, I had a question specifically for DVS, because I hear a lot of talk about money and money lost in protests, but I don't hear so much more about the money that we're sending as an institution to decimate a population, to continue to enforce apartheid upon a whole nation and people, which the ICC has warrants for their leaders, and these warrants are to be exact for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And the ICJ has ruled that there might be a plausible genocide, and that's to put it lightly if we all know the rulings of how ICJs go. And that they are also dealing with apartheid. So a lot about money and about property rights, not so much about the rights of the Palestinian people to continue to exist.
I find it a stretch that we as a University of Amsterdam are doing a genocide, but yeah, our stance on the third party collaboration is that we look at the ethics committee, and if the ethics commission says the human rights violations, there are human rights violations, then we follow that stance. So yeah, I don't think that's a very extreme stance.
Inter, would you like to respond?
I think the crux of the issue is really being forgotten here, and that is that what is happening in the world today is unacceptable. Human rights violations towards such a large group of people should not be taking place. Let's not group protests together and claim that one cause of damage is the reason why all protests should be subdued through restrictions, because as I've said before, we start setting a dangerous precedent by doing so. What we need to acknowledge is, yes, the academic environment should not be disrupted. However, those reasons are because we need to be able to continue critical dialogue, critical discourse. We also have to be able to continue protests and the right to demonstrations in a safe and coordinated manner. What the university is lacking in its policy right now is the cooperation with the student population that has been attempting for months to make their voices heard without movement in an active way. If we were to do that, what we need to do is have more platforms of discourse between university councils and the student population, rather than arguing and blaming fingers at certain populations when the crux of the issue is that people are unfortunately dying in a way that the university is complicit to.
One final, very quick comment.
Yes, I wanted to have a quick comment on what the Vrij student said about following the advices of this ethical committee, because this was a topic that was discussed in the CSR, and the Vrij student voted against having the advice from the ethical commission be binding to the university. So if we just have an ethical committee and we don't really listen to it because, I don't know, the Vrij student thinks it's not reasonable enough, then what do we even have an ethical committee for?
Would UvA Social like to comment on this before we turn to one final question from the audience?
As I mentioned earlier about the ethical committee, it has been inactive for multiple years. We do generally agree with their stance, but when there's no transparency and when there's a lot of inactivity, especially when students have been asking the university about certain collaborations, I think that's something the university should definitely look into.
Do we have one final question in the audience? Yes, over here at the front.
Although protests are an active way of changing something in the world and in the university itself, what other productive ways have each party done like in the past or do plan to do in the future to directly change and improve the students' well-being?
Starting with UvA Social, you have the mic.
At UvA Social, dialogue has always been our primary way to join protests. We always support the other parties, associations that have been involved in these protests. We do think dialogue is the best way to get through to student administration, student bodies. And yeah.
Moving along, Inter.
Yeah, I think your question was more geared towards what more than protests. Two big things that Inter is doing and will continue to do is having the student newsletter, because information campaigns are just as important as being active. If we are being active without the proper education about the problem that is occurring, we're not moving forward in a constructive nor productive way. The second thing is having student forums that connect students themselves with upper bodies. This helps with delegating knowledge, making sure that everyone involved has the knowledge to move forward, and ultimately creates a platform of discourse that we can work with rather than one that just produces clash between the two parties without getting anywhere.
Yeah, I really like the question. We really want to do it the formal way, with dialogue, to talk to the directors, to change policy at the university. If you've seen that the activist party has given the chair the last 2 years, they had all the ways to change policy at the university, and they choose to riot, vandalize the university in place of talking with the directors of this university to foster real change.
May I answer? Yeah. Activist and Partij, as said before, is not only active as an activist community, but also in the councils. We are in most councils of the university, and there we actually push for institutional change. So, for example, abolishing the BSA to reduce the pressure on students, abolish mandatory attendance to make sure that students don't have to face the stress of choosing between living or studying, increasing social safety measures as making it more easy for students to reach out when they have issues at the universities, and also accommodating for student needs. So, for example, for students with disabilities, students with diverse backgrounds, and students with neurodivergence, the universities should accommodate their needs and think about their well-being and not what the price of that is. Thank you.
Thank you.